The president's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, faces day 3 of his trial. He's charged with bank fraud and tax evasion. Today, the prosecution said that they will call Rick Gates as a witness. And this also comes, as prosecutors said yesterday, they may or may not. Well, Gates is a longtime business partner of Manafort. He's also been billed as a star witness. CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid is following the trial outside the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Paula, I want to get in a second to the Manafort trial, but I want to start with the back and forth between the president's legal team and the special counsel. Where exactly do those negotiations stand about that Mueller-Trump interview?
Well, at the outset, it is very unlikely the president will actually sit for an interview with the special counsel. His own lawyers have acknowledged that in this particular situation with this particular client, it's probably not in their best interest. But negotiations continue, and this is mostly driven by the president's lawyers who send different objections or demands to the special counsel, and they respond. Most recently, the president's lawyer said that they do not want their client to have to answer any questions about obstruction of justice. But because that is one of sort of the core tenets of the investigation, and specifically what they're looking at when it comes to the president, not surprisingly, special counsel rejected that suggestion. But they did say they may be willing to ask fewer questions about obstruction of justice. So they continue to go back and forth negotiating. But again, a lot of these negotiations, these are driven by the president's attorneys sending demands, sending suggestions, and then initiating a return.
So the president seems to think that an interview with Mueller will ultimately lead to the Mueller investigation to wrap up this investigation. Do you think that Mueller team sees it that way?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the special counsel investigation is multifaceted. The president looking at him and possible obstruction of justice, that's just one tiny part of this. They're also looking at people who are working on behalf of Russia. We know he's indicted troll farms. We know he's indicted people who work for the Russian government. We know he's also indicted several people who are associated with the president, but this is a multifaceted investigation. There's this question about conspiracy. There are questions of anyone lying to investigators. Obviously, we saw that with his former national security advisor, Mike Flynn. We also see with the president questions of obstruction of justice. So just because you get rid of one star witness doesn't mean the whole thing's over. I mean, the president has repeatedly said a lot of this has nothing to do with him or his campaign. The trial going on here, Paul Manafort, has nothing to do with the president, nothing to do with the campaign. So just because they would potentially interview the president doesn't mean the whole thing's wrapping up.
I want to turn back for a second to Manafort and the trial here. You know, how is the defense preparing to handle the testimony from Rick Gates?
Well, there were questions yesterday about whether Rick Gates would testify. Rick Gates is, of course, Paul Manafort's longtime business associate. He was also the deputy campaign chairman for the Trump campaign. They were both charged together for tax evasion, bank fraud, and other offenses related to their personal business dealings. Eventually, Richard Gates, he entered a plea deal with special counsel. He has agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency in his own case, and it was expected that he would testify against Manafort. And yesterday there was some confusion. I'll tell you what happened, Rena. The prosecution was trying to enter a document into evidence. The judge said, well, can't Rick Gates just testify to this? And the prosecutor said, well, he may or may not testify. And there were audible gasps in the courtroom. A lot of people thought, oh, my goodness, this is an enormous about-face for the prosecution's strategy. But the fact is, they were just trying to get around the judge. They wanted to get their document in. They were saying, look, hypothetically, if he gets hit by a bus tomorrow, he won't come, so let us put our document in. But they confirmed today he is going to testify. He will be their star witness. We'll likely see him tomorrow or Monday.
It's interesting to hear that back and forth. You know, the other thing that was so fascinating yesterday was how the judge pushed back on this whole line about Manafort's very lavish lifestyle that he led. Walk us through that, Paula, and what exactly is your strategy in doing this?
So you have to picture the scene. A lot of this trial has been a bit like an episode of The Lifestyles in Rich and Famous. They're putting on these witnesses who worked at luxury men's clothing stores and having them describe all the items, the $21,000 watch, the $15,000 coat and vest made of ostrich, all of these things. And they sort of try to connect those luxury purchases to how they were paid for. And they also have people testifying that a lot of these items were paid for from accounts in Cyprus. And they asked the shopkeepers, it is unusual for people to pay for their ostrich coat through Cyprus. Is that unusual? Do most people use credit cards? All these shopkeepers said, look, while Manafort was one of our best clients, it was very unusual that he was moving money from Cyprus to pay us. And that's the crux of the prosecution's theory, Rena, that he was laundering money. He would receive money from his lobbying work, stash it in offshore accounts, and then buy luxury items, real estate, cars, clothing here in the U.S., to get that money into the U.S. without having to disclose it to the IRS. But the judge is adamant. He said, look, he's not on trial here for being rich or throwing his money around or even bad taste for this ostrich coat. He is on trial specifically for bank fraud, tax evasion, and other offenses, and the judge just really wants to make sure they keep that tight and that they're very specific.
Yeah, he certainly is not on trial for bad taste for an ostrich coat, but there were some questionable items there. I was not sure I would pay that amount for those jackets. Paula Reid, thank you so much for joining us, Paula.